熱くなれ夢見た明日を必ずいつか捕まえる
Whenever the mecha genre is brought up in a conversation, the other person may immediately think one of two things: weapons of mass destruction used in a war setting, or, if the other person is cool enough, a symbol of hope that saves humanity time and time again through sheer force of will. Some examples of the former include stuff like Gundam, Macross, Code Geass, and Zone of the Enders, while the latter encompasses things like Gurren Lagann, Getter Robo, Mazinger Z, and Zone of the Enders. Wait, hold on a minute. Son of the Enders? Well, that's definitely real robot. Oh, I see. Son of the Enders, the second runner, also known as Anubis, Son of the Enders in Japan, is pretty legendary. I honestly wasn't expecting this game to be so excellent, given my feelings towards the first game. But lo and behold, here we have what's quite possibly the best mecha game ever made. It's the glow-up of the century. So, without any further ado, let's talk about Zone of the Enders, the second runner. Zoe 2's tone is significantly different than that of its predecessor. It's still a story dealing with themes of war and all that, but it's undeniably goofier than the previous entry. It's very noticeable right from the get-go. Just comparing their opening songs is enough, really. It's this difference in tone that makes this game feel closer to a super robot rather than, you know, Gundam. Zoe 2 is campy, in the best way possible. The plot is kinda there, but it never really takes itself too seriously. There's a bad guy, and veteran pilot Dengo has to stop him. There's more to it than that, sure, and there's a lot of lore for such a short-lived series, but in the end that's really all it is, and that's completely fine with me. The voice acting is another quality that adds to the overall campiness.
What are you doing on this ship anyway?
If anything happens to my pals on Callisto, you'll pay.
I didn't kill them.
I don't believe you.
I mentioned Dengo earlier, and he is a much better protagonist than Leo. He has an actual personality and sense of humor, but most importantly, he doesn't get on my nerves. Leo was so inconsistently written that it was actually painful. Dengo gets shot in the first 30 minutes, and to save his life, he is basically fused to Jehuti. If he ever leaves the cockpit, for whatever reason, he's going to die. He just lives there now. I don't think I need to explain how fucking metal this is. Dengo even has a small arc, going from being apprehensive about the situation he's found himself in, to being a beacon of hope to every soldier on the battlefield. You know, classic stuff. No Man from the first game, if you even remember him, makes a return as the big bad guy. He didn't really have much to do in Zoe 1, and to me he just came off as some super one-dimensional guy, but in Zoe 2 he's just pure evil. When I say pure evil, I really mean it. He's such a bad guy that it just becomes comical towards the end. I love it. Seriously, this game can be so charming at times, it's unbelievable, especially coming off of the stale war's bad story the first game was going for.
This is just a form of entertainment.
You devil.
While I really did hate Leo in the first game, even I have to admit he's kind of cool in Zoe 2. He has grown up since the events of the first game and now confronts his problems head on, being willing to go as far as to disobey direct orders to ensure the peace of his people. He fights in the name of peace and will not stop until everyone he cares for is safe, including Ada. He's still a little childish at times, so his emotions take over every now and then. This was a part of his character in the first game, but it's a character trait that seemed to weave in and out of existence at will, whereas in this game I was sold on it from beginning to end. The cherry on top is his new design and his Lev, the Vic Viper. Yes, Vic Viper, as in the ship from Gradius. Remember that? Jojo Shinkawa sure does. Vic Viper is a perfect fit for Zoe 2 Leo. They're both Earthlings fighting tooth and nail against those darned Martians. Oh, also Vic Viper is not only a Gradius reference but a Zeta Gundam reference as well. Me rambling for this long about a character I used to hate and some stupid robot should probably tell you how much I love this game. So, gameplay. Zone of the Enders had an interesting take on the action genre. Jehuti is able to move in any direction. Yes, any direction, giving the game an emphasis on smart positioning that other games simply don't offer. The controls are perfect for this kind of game. Triangle makes Jehuti ascend, and X makes it descend. hit square at a distance for a ranged attack, get close and personal for a melee attack. On top of that, there's charged variations of every attack and so on and so forth. Where that game stumbled was in its level design and overall pacing. Levels were painfully dull and empty, and the pacing suffered from constant backtracking that made the whole game feel padded to hell. Combat was by far my favorite thing in the first game, and every single bit of praise I gave it also applies to this game. As if what they already had wasn't interesting enough, Koji Pro decided to greatly expand and improve upon the already established formula. Gone are the world map and tedious backtracking that plagued Zoe 1, replaced by a much more linear progression with an emphasis on fun combat encounters above all else. The levels this time around are extremely varied, from a snowy planet to a military ship to Mars and much more. The level design on the whole has been vastly improved upon, with stages now being filled with obstacles that can be used in smart ways during combat. Again, Zone of the Enders is, at its core, a game about smart positioning and movement, so just having stuff like pillars to hide behind or to get around enemies is already a massive improvement over the empty battle arenas from the first game. Zoe 2 gets pretty insane with its levels as it goes on, culminating on the moving pillars of Fortress City that can easily crush Dingo if the player isn't being careful, but can also be used to guard against incoming attacks and even crush enemies with some skillful play. And this is a microcosm of everything I love about Zoe 2. It's a game that gives players a vast array of tools to find their own solutions to every combat encounter, but also is not afraid to punish unskillful play. Zoe 2 is faster. As in, way faster. Jehuti's speed has been boosted to hell and back, making the first game seem like a slog in retrospect. The dash maneuver serves as a proper dodge this time around. Dingo can dash in any direction out of every action, and on top of that, it's also possible to now dash behind opponents with a well-timed dodge. On top of dodging, players can also block incoming attacks and essentially parry melee attacks by slashing at enemies, way before Platinum thought of doing that with Metal Gear Rising. Crossing blades isn't as useful as your typical parry, as it usually doesn't open up enemies for an immediate counterattack, but instead pushes them back, giving you some room to breathe. Jehuti's offensive capabilities have also been expanded upon, with combos finally being a thing in this game. After a basic string of 3 melee attacks, players can do a variety of things. Pressing square sends enemies flying like usual, triangle sends them upwards, X sending them downwards, which, of course, are meant to resemble Jehuti's flight controls, and honestly, it's very intuitive. The basic 3-string combo can be cancelled into a dash to start up another combo on that same enemy or a different foe altogether, or you could also use a spinning attack as a finisher move. This is a colossal step forward when compared to Zoe 1's constant button mashing. In that game, the only button you ever really needed to press was square. As for the triangle/X finishers, those also have some benefits. The obvious effect of ending a combo with these inputs is that they temporarily get rid of an enemy, so you can then move on to damaging another. The less obvious effect is that enemies being launched into surfaces, such as ceilings, pillars, or the ground itself, inflict some extra damage. Hell, you could go a step further and have them hit other mechs. Once again, it's that sweet emphasis on positioning. Zoe 2 wants you to be aware of your surroundings at all times. You have to be able to judge which moves and finishers are best for your situation. When playing on a level like Mars, which doesn't have any ceilings or anything of the sort, it may be best to prioritize downward thrusts for extra damage. Or hell, even the basic finisher to make enemies collide with the canyon itself. Also, kind of a side note, but the energy ball thingy I complained about in my previous video actually got fixed. You really have to charge it up for more damage now, instead of having it be a basic input that does massive damage. This game's like a dream come true. The on-the-fly weapon switching from the first game makes a return, now with a few tweaks. You can still cycle through sub-weapons with the D-pad, but this time around you can also hold L1 to bring up a quick select menu. From here, you can select your desired sub-weapon and jump back into the game. While the D-pad method doesn't interrupt gameplay, it can also lead to some frustrating moments where a player selects the wrong sub-weapon. You have to take your thumb off the joystick to do this, and in a game as fast-paced as Zoe 2, that could end up ruining your combo or straight up killing you. The quick select menu is a nice compromise, and frankly, ends up being way more useful in the long run, since there's a lot of different sub-weapons in this game. Sub-weapons also don't require ammo to be used. This is something I failed to mention in my review, but an action game requiring you to grind for resources just to use your arsenal is, well, stupid. Sub-weapons in Zoe 2 consume sub-gauge in varying degrees. Some sub-weapons like Gauntlet and Wisp drain a very small amount of sub-gauge, while stuff like the homing missiles and the vector cannon empty it fairly quickly. Sub-gauge can be replenished by consuming Metatron, aka a full heal, or by defeating certain enemies that the game will kindly point out are carrying sub-gauge energy. It's worth mentioning that, unlike the first game, enemies don't just drop Metatron every 5 seconds. For the most part, the most reliable method of replenishing the sub-gauge is to go on the offensive and kill the energy carriers ASAP. There are always some energy carriers around in each encounter after a certain point, right when players are most likely to start seriously using up the sub-gauge. In order to be able to effectively use your entire arsenal, you have to be fast and aggressive, constantly on the lookout for energy carriers. This time around, Jehuti has some new things to play around with. While some weapons like Javelin and Sniper are gone, I don't think I'll miss them considering what we got in return. On top of every returning weapon, there's Wisp, which allows Jehuti to snatch enemies from a distance, floating mines to set up traps and surprise attacks, homing missiles to cause some serious AoE damage, and finally, the vector cannon. I don't think I even have to explain why the vector cannon is the coolest fucking thing ever made. While it needs some setup, Jehuti needs to have its feet planted on the ground to even activate it, and it consumes a ton of sub-gauge, it's worth the trouble every time I feel like using it. It absolutely destroys everything in its path, and is the most tuney thing in video game history.
Shift to vector cannon mode. All energy lines connected. Landing gear and climbing irons locked. Inner chamber pressure rising normally. Life ring has started revolving. Ready to fire.
Another action that consumes sub-gauge is blocking. In Zoe 1, blocking could be abused to essentially prevent any sort of damage. In Zoe 2, blocking consumes sub-gauge after every hit received, as a means to balancing out the mechanic. There are also a lot of attacks that can break Jehuti's guard, so it's not the unbreakable shield that it used to be in the first game. Newcomers are free to block when they really need to, but as they get better and better at the game, they start learning about dodging and sword crossing. It's a satisfying learning curve. In the first game, Leo could grab enemies even when he had a sub-weapon equipped. This led to some instances where I wanted to use a weapon, but the game registered it as me trying to go for a grab. In Zoe 2, grabs are an individual action that's selectable through the L1 menu. This had the potential to be extremely tedious, but thankfully they thought of everything. While holding L1 brings up the quick select menu, just tapping it switches between your equipped weapon and the grab, and vice versa. This creates a nice rhythm during combat where players are constantly switching between weapons and grabs. This time around, you even have options after performing a grab. You can use enemies as weapons, use them as shields, throw them, or throw them. You could hurl enemies like a nerd, or you could spin dunk them to oblivion by mashing the circle button after a successful grab. On top of being, again, the sickest shit ever coded into a game, it also inflicts extra damage depending on how long you spin for. The spin also damages nearby enemies, and Jehuti is invincible during this whole process, so go wild. While this is really unbalanced, I have to admit I don't care that much, it's too cool. On top of having some solid level design and fun combat, Zoe 2 also has some seriously amazing set pieces. The first one that comes to mind being Dingo taking down a Baram fleet all by himself. It's memorable not only because you get to do it yourself through gameplay, but also because you have to use the vector cannon. The most legendary of all has to be the battle outside of Alman, where the game goes full on Dynasty Warriors. It's honestly really ambitious for a game of this era. It's you and an army of 80 or so left pilots fighting against a massive swarm of enemies. This part of the game made me feel the brutality of war a lot more effectively than anything in the first game. You even get ranked at the end based on how many left survived the encounter. A problem I do have with the sequence is how friendly fire seems to just be enabled. I get that it makes sense for Jehuti's homing missiles to also hit some lefts on accident, but the lock-on guiding you directly towards the left instead of an enemy is something that really bothers me. You can heal and save them by using the sub-weapon Geyser, so I guess it could be a lot worse. Still though, on the whole, it's a pretty fun level. Zoe 2 tries to mix things up by sprinkling these types of levels here and there, but unfortunately I can't say they're all winners. Second Runner's biggest problem is consistency. When you're in the zone and you're fighting mechs, it's an extremely fun game. But there are some genuinely baffling missions that just destroy the game's momentum. The first offender is this mission where you have to guess where Taper, a left pilot, is hiding. There are 4 possible rooms he could be in, and it boils down to guesswork. Thankfully, he does end up giving you some hints, but even that isn't enough to make this not boring. Navigation isn't exactly SOE2's greatest strength, and this really highlights that. There's also another mission later on that is very reminiscent of SOE 1's side missions. You have to defeat all the enemies in the area while avoiding damage to nearby buildings. Again, this kind of mission isn't exactly fun for an action game because it heavily restricts the player's moveset for no good reason. If you want a good ranking on this mission, then I hope you're ready to use Geyser a lot. It's still nowhere near as bad as the SOE 1 side missions, but I still can't help but groan whenever I get to it. There's another moment later on that I have some issues with. It's this escort mission that isn't too bad on paper, but the camera constantly gets stuck on walls, and that's just no fun. But by far, the worst offender has to be the journey to Fortress City. It's highly annoying, really boring, and takes forever to get through. Ken, your assistant for this segment, tells you where you need to go in order to avoid some landmines. This involves a lot of waiting around. Like, a lot.
We're on this side and the other side is... Oh, no? Yeah, maybe. Correct the direction. Left a little bit more. Good. Move forward. Stop.
And you do it every 10 steps or so. You can't engage in combat either because I guess that'll throw her off or something. You just have to suck it up and do what she tells you to do. It's awful. Keep in mind, Second Runner is a pretty short game, so having a decent percentage of this shit in the game is very bad. I also mentioned a bit ago how the camera during Ken's escort mission tends to get stuck on everything, and this is another thing holding SOE 2 back. The camera. The camera in the first game was shockingly smooth for the kind of game Zone of the Enders is, but in retrospect that may just have been a direct result of the empty battle arenas in that game. SOE 2's levels have more things in them, meaning there's now a higher chance of the camera fucking up during combat. SOE 2 came out in 2003, and by then action games had already found a solution to that problem. Sacrifice a bit of realism by making objects turn transparent if they're in the way of the action. The final stretch is seriously something else. Jehuti finally obtains the Zero Shift, an ability which allows it to teleport anywhere. Yes, teleports behind you, nothing personal. Needless to say, this is pretty busted, and the game knows it. Your victory lap is getting to rip and tear through hordes of mechs with this thing. With Zero Shift, Jehuti can teleport towards a locked on target, damaging everything in its path as a nice bonus. Teleport away from attacks, giving the player a large window to counterattack. Teleport either up or down by pressing triangle/X and circle. And of course, we have the final boss, Anubis. Anubis has been hyped up since the first game, with him appearing throughout both games to beat the shit out of the player character. But after powering up beyond the bounds, Jehuti can finally take on Anubis. Oh, but you don't fight Anubis just the one time. You get to fight Anubis 3 times before the credits roll. That makes for a total of 6 Anubis fights throughout the series. I think I'm fine with them milking this considering how undeniably cool Anubis is. Of course, with Zero Shift now being at play, the tuning factor of these fights goes up by about 1,000. Not only are they fun fights in their own right, but also absolutely stunning visually. From the inside of the All-Mine Fortress to fighting in space inside a beam of pure energy or something, to the big showdown inside the big bad energy reactor that's about to destroy Mars. As if that wasn't badass enough, Jehuti gets fucked up beyond belief and has to confront Anubis while handicapped. It's just classic, legendary, simple, but magnificent. The ending is some Getter Robo type shit, with Jehuti hurling Anubis' destroyed torso towards the reactor core to make the moon explode, saving Mars at the very last second. I just can't. Why don't more people talk about this game? And this shot. Leo looking up at a wrecked Jehuti, with Mars now being freed from its shackles, peace finally having been obtained. I never thought I would feel anything other than hate towards Leo and Ada, yet here we are. Now, I don't think the plot is by any means great. It's certainly very simple, and not much of anything really happens, but I would definitely say it's effective. It gets you excited when it wants you to, and right at the very end, it manages to make you feel somewhat melancholic. Hold on a minute, Kazuma Kaneko, the Shin Megami Tensei artist? Yeah, side note right at the end, but Kaneko from Atlas designed the orbital framed inert. Fun fact, he also designed the Devil Trigger forms in Devil May Cry 3. You know, action games were a lot better when Kazuma Kaneko was drawing action game characters. Zone of the Enders 2 isn't a perfect game, far from it, but it's undeniably unique and nails most of its ideas. Before playing it, I'd heard people calling it the true Son of the Enders, with the joke being that Zoe 1 was some weird beta that leaked to the public. Well, in some ways, yes, revisiting the first game after playing Zoe 2 makes it feel oddly behind the times. On the whole, I think I respect it a lot more now. It was an ambitious game that stumbled a lot, but because of the criticism they received, the staff at Koji Pro was able to make, in my opinion, one of the best sequels in video game history. Second Runner is so good that it retroactively makes the first game a lot better in my eyes. Even though I've practically spoiled everything there is to see in this game, I would still highly encourage everyone watching this video to go out and buy it. It's a type of game that sadly we may never see again, so that alone is worth the price of admission in my book. While it is a shame that we'll most likely never get a Zone of the Enders 3, I can at least say I'm satisfied with things ending this way, and we are finally free from Konami. Once again, thank you for watching, and see you next time.